Technology on standby now for blowouts, not blue skies thinking.
Well, we asked BP if they'd talk to us, but they didn't want to. But we are joined now by John Sovan, the Executive Director of Greenpeace, and from Los Angeles by John Hofmeister, the former president of Shell. Can you hear us all right, Mr. Hofmeister?
Yes, I hear you fine.
Excellent, good. I was just wondering, thinking about the report there, whether it doesn't really show that this moratorium on deep sea drilling should continue for a long while yet.
Well, I think the moratorium is a horrific mistake, which will ultimately perhaps cost the administration its future. The problems that existed on the Deepwater Horizon, I think, are unique to Deepwater Horizon. With 40 years of experience and 40,000 wells having been drilled safely in the Gulf of Mexico, I think the record stands for itself. We had a combination of multiple human errors. All the government regulations in the world will never prevent human beings from making judgment mistakes, which were obviously made in this case.
Right. John Sovan, what lesson do you draw from this report?
Well, I think human error is always going to be there. The question is, when you're going to extreme environments like BP is doing, very deep water, where if something goes wrong, you can't deal with it, that's the key issue. Or like with Cairn Energy, you're now opening up a new frontier in the Arctic. The key problem is, whatever the accident, when something goes wrong, when you're in those extreme environments, you can't deal with it. But I think it also shows...
Hang on, let's just take up that point. John Hofmeister, that makes a certain amount of common sense of the whole thing, doesn't it?
The whole secret of success in operating in deep water is to mitigate risk before risk occurs. This didn't happen under the conditions in which we were learning.
But the point is, if an accident happens at some depth, it is likely to be of greater severity, is it not?
It is, but that's why you take the risk mitigating factors ahead of time, beginning with the design of the well and carrying all through the equipment maintenance.
And if
when a blowout protector goes...
I agree, but if it happens in the Arctic, there's nothing you can do about it. And that's a pristine wilderness environment which is already suffering the consequences of climate change. So, I mean, I would put to you, really, because you're also quite into alternative energy, you know, when in the hole, stop digging. I mean, surely the question now is, oil is finite, we're now going to extreme environments to find this oil with catastrophic consequences potentially to the environment, certainly to the climate. Isn't it time now to kind of rethink the whole energy strategy, look for alternatives, talk more about fuel efficiency, less need for all of this oil, like deal with the demand side rather than the supply side?
Okay, hang on, let him answer that.
And I've written an entire book on that very subject, and I agree with you. But it's not an either-or situation. It's a both-and situation. So we both have to progress to a new energy system, and we have to supply the current energy system in whatever ways we can. And I would submit that over the last 40 years, the technology of offshore drilling, including deep water, has advanced tremendously. The mistakes of the Macondo well will be put into new technologies and new safety precautions, but that should not stop us from moving forward. We need oil every day.
What do you think is an acceptable level for drilling in terms of depth?
Well, I think that what BP is doing...
No, I'm asking you a straight question.
Well,
you're criticising deep water drilling.
Okay.
What's acceptable?
Well, Obama has put...
I'm asking you what you think.
A couple of 100 meters. And
no more than that. You
yes.
stop all wells beyond that.
Yes, and I think that that's where the moratorium cap has been put. And so that would affect deep water drilling, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico. It would affect the potential deep water drilling that the UK government wants to open up west of Shetland.
You don't have a problem then with anything up to 200 metres?
Well, look, let's be realistic here. We need oil. I don't deny that. We need the conventional oil that we have, we're going to need to use in order to give us time to develop alternatives, to force through efficiency measures with car manufacturers and so on and so forth, so we can deal with the demand rather than the supply. Right. But, you know, there's a lot of oil that we can get quite safely from land. If something goes wrong, we can deal with it. If it's in shallow waters and something goes wrong, we can also deal with it. We're talking about extreme frontiers.
Sure. Mr. Hofmeister, the evidence is that BP didn't operate any differently. They operated under exactly the same sorts of regulations as every other company trying to extract oil at that depth.
That's correct, but they made some egregious human errors. We'll find out if it was BP's egregious errors or Transocean or Halliburton or whomever in the course of the investigation and the litigation that will follow.
Absolutely,
but let's remember there are more than 2,000 wells that have been safely drilled and are producing in the deepwater Gulf of Mexico
absolutely
today,
under precisely the same regulatory regime, and we do not know what other errors may be being made within the confines of that regime.
The regime is overall safe. What we had were egregious. This was like an airplane pilot who ignored the findings on his air traffic control system and flew the airplane right into the mountainside, while the co-pilot might have been saying, we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing this. We have to find out what all happened on the rig the night that that accident took place, because I think that there were decisions made in real time which led to the disaster, which never should have happened.
That is theory.
And it's not the regulations. It's not the regulations
sure.
or the lack of regulations that led to the exposure.
Look, what's unarguable is that when it happened, they hadn't got the means to control it. That's unarguable.
And that, I think, is the key issue, because there will always be human error. There is, in most of major accidents, when they do investigative reports, they always find human error very often at the centre of it. That you cannot regulate away. And that is precisely the problems. When you go into extreme environments like the Arctic or like deep water, when you have an accident where human error is at its core, you cannot deal with it.
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed. The first Scots nationalist to lead the government of Scotland announced what he plans to do in Parliament today. There are bills on all sorts of things, registering reservoirs, the cost of cremation, but scarcely a squeak about plans for a referendum on shaking off the English jackboot from the Scottish neck. This most sacred commitment, the very heart of the party,